Hello and welcome to the show. Today I've got one of my friends, Josiah, here. He's coming from Des Moines, and he and I have known each other in real life, and we've kept up even though we've moved apart. He is also a big fan of movies and reading, but I've brought him on the show today to talk about movies. Specifically, I wanted to pick his brain about some questions about how we perceive movies and what might change, what might separate a more intentional moviegoer from a casual moviegoer.
Sure, yeah.
Josiah, thank you again for coming on.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, why don't you just tell us briefly about yourself?
I'm Josiah. I host a couple, well, I used to host a couple podcasts. I now host one podcast called Fruitless. It is kind of just a general politics and media podcast. We talk about movies, music, and politics, as well as themes in like religion, being a former evangelical, big theme, and a lot of stuff I talk about. I've also got a YouTube channel that's kind of a part of that podcast that I've thrown a few video essays on film on. So
Nice.
people are interested in that. You can watch a long history of zombie films I made, as well as one on the films of Motor Media and one on Benny's Video, the Michael Haneke film. So
Nice.
yeah.
Cool. And so I know you primarily from, seeing a lot of your updates on Letterboxd, and you watch a lot of movies. And how long would you say that you've been into watching movies kind of seriously or more regularly?
Yeah, that's it's kind of a hard question to answer because, on some level, we all watch movies throughout our lives mostly. So it's there's a lot of, I was watching movies. I had movies I loved, in high school or whatever. But I really think I started to actually take it seriously as an art form. I wanted to engage with a lot in college or so, and then I especially 2020 and onward. I think so. Because of that, a lot of people become cinephiles in high school or whatever. So I've kind of jokingly called myself a remedial cinephile a lot because I went through being in my mid-20s and being like, I should probably watch Citizen Kane, huh? Not in high school when a lot of cinephiles tend to do that stuff. I was I don't know, going back and trying to watch classics when I felt like I was a little too old to be doing that, but whatever.
I don't know that there's too much of an age limit
No.
because at least they're out there, and I'll be honest, I haven't seen Citizen Kane yet either.
It's one of those ones that has such a hype around it. It seems intimidating, but it shouldn't be. It's just, it's really fun. It's actually not a boring movie.
Yeah. Did you take any classes on film in college?
I took one that wasn't really a film class. We just watched films for it, but it was a French class because I minored in French. And so it was a comparative, comparative French cinema. So we would watch a French movie and then watch an American remake of that movie and see what cultural stuff shifts in it. So I don't know. This wasn't we weren't watching Godard. This wasn't a French cinema class. It was it was watching the original French Three Men and a Baby and then watching the American remake.
Okay.
Which was actually pretty interesting, but it was a lot of those kind of movies, just kind of, dumb comedies or something like that, and seeing how the humor changed once it came over to the States.
So you mentioned Citizen Kane. What was that the first movie that you watched intentionally thinking, not I have a desire to see this, but I feel like I ought to? Or was there maybe another movie that's even before that you maybe say, okay, that's where I really felt like I wanted to not miss out on the conversation?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. I don't know what the first for that would be for me. It would be earlier than that though. 'Cause Citizen Kane I watched like I said, kind of embarrassingly recently, but it was I think I don't know, probably one of the most formative for me directors because these are the ones I was into in high school before I even fully got into film, but then they would lay the groundwork for when I was really actually getting into it would be Coen Brothers and, embarrassing, like, I mean, not embarrassing, but Quentin Tarantino. It always feels like it's like the typical like straight white guy director, but I was a straight white guy in high school, so
Yeah. Hey,
love Tarantino.
We all start somewhere.
Yeah. So I don't know. I would say those were ones I was engaging with where I was like, okay, I I recognize this stylistically as something separate from just like kind of studio movies I generally watch. These
Okay.
are, have an artistic touch. And then, in again, classic straight white guy fashion, Wes Anderson came a little bit after that. So I think those would be like the big guys.
And I feel like the genre isn't always that easy to split because it seems that a lot of studios, and you mentioned Wes Anderson, he's someone that comes to mind. They're trying to get that mass appeal with that quirky independent feel. There's a lot more movies out there that are not either mainstream or very special interest. It seems like maybe perhaps they've always been there, but maybe I just have more awareness now of the movies that are trying to kind of
Do both.
do both.
Yeah. No, that totally. Yeah. That's kind of the thing that makes it hard to like. I think that film is a really hard medium to do the high versus low kind of thing. I think in general, all art, is always kind of trying to figure out what to do with that distinction and whether it's even valuable or not. But I think film, especially because it's like, you get into high art film, and then what are they doing? They're actually pulling from low art film all the time,
like the King Kong movie that Peter Jackson did. He was inspired by a lot of the low B movies that he grew up on.
Yeah, exactly. That's a perfect example.
So one thing that
go ahead. Go ahead.
One thing I find interesting, and this has actually been just recently where I've changed my mind a little bit. You talked about how it's hard to quantify film as high or low, and I think one of the reasons that is that it's so collaborative. That whereas most other art is done by an individual. You've got vast teams, sometimes across many countries, over potentially several years, working on a film, and everyone's got their own little portion. And we'd like to think that the director is the one who pulls it all together, but we know that executive producers have some say. They may run into logistical challenges, and ultimately a good director can't overcome bad writing, in my opinion. They can try.
They can try. Yeah. Sometimes the best examples of it are just with the director feels like they're starting to make fun of their own movie because they're like, I've got a terrible script. This is what I have to work with.
I listened to Patrick Stewart's memoir, Making It So, last year.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the things he talked about in there was how, as an actor, he doesn't concern himself with the whole movie. He concerns himself with his role and how he takes it on, and the challenge of getting his role just right. And I thought about how so frequently I have judged actors like, how could you get in a movie this bad? Did you not know? And and I think perhaps sometimes the actors don't know how it's going to turn out, but I also think that sometimes they just don't see it the same way. They don't see it as they have a quote brand to protect. They may see it as, well, this character seemed interesting, and I honestly don't care how the whole movie turns out as long as I did my best with this character.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. I think that sometimes that's best because this is where the director, I think, ideally is functioning as auteur, often involves then kind of doing a management where you get those actors to focus on their individual role in the movie, you know. So like I think that's kind of where that can happen at its best, is like, you know, is a actor not full, okay, I think is I might be misconstruing this, but in the, you know, the show Succession, Jeremy Strong didn't seem to understand it was supposed to be a comedy, and I think that was a good thing, because his character is so self-serious and so unaware of how ridiculous of a character he is, that I think it's good that he kind of like didn't seem to fully understand how much of a comedy it was.
Yeah.
Because that helped him do that character so well.
I haven't seen Succession, but when you said that, it made me think of the Muppet Christmas Carol with Michael Caine. Michael Caine
Yes.
plays
Oh,
this
that's a
dead
great
ass
example.
serious. He's
Yeah.
never smiles. Well, maybe he smiles like once or twice the whole movie, but he's super serious, and you've got the most off the walls
Ridiculous.
side stories going on.
No, that's why that movie is so good. I mean, like, because yeah, I watched that this last Christmas, and I was kind of just floored how well it aged, like how well it's held up. And I think it's because it is so ridiculous and it's having fun with the story, but it's also still a really faithful, well done adaptation of A Christmas Carol. And part of that is Michael Caine just playing it completely straight. He's not ever winking at the camera about how isn't it crazy I'm doing this story with Muppets? No, he is in this story and he's doing that role.
Yeah. You know, on a completely different topic, I think that I appreciate those actors that are so committed to their role that they almost elevate whatever they're in.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, I don't say this as a personal attack, but in almost every movie I've seen with Ryan Reynolds, he plays the same character. Like,
Yeah.
You know, you don't have to make a joke about everything, because that's not natural. It makes the jokes, when they are funny, kind of fall flat, because like, oh, well, here's another joke.
Yeah, no, he's very much like the actor that represents kind of a I don't know, been a consensus in movies in the last 10 years that I just don't really like, is the quippiness kind of thing, the kind of Joss Whedon influenced, like, you know, so that just happened kind of sense of humor.
It's funny
drives me insane
sometimes, but when it's overdone, it's
terrible. Yeah. Like, yeah, a handful of them, you know, if they're well done, I can laugh at a quip, but it's often just undermining, you know, the seriousness of any given moment. And I don't know, like, I don't think, you know, if you have a movie always at the same tone, you know, where it's you know, it never can be serious and it can never be just funny. It's always blurring those two together in kind of a slurry, I don't know.
And I think, correct me if you think differently, but I think part of that is because directors understand that a lot of moviegoers don't want to feel uncomfortable, and so they don't want to be uncomfortable for too long. Oh, that was pretty serious, let's lighten it up. You know, I think about a movie that just was devastating to watch, was 12 Years a Slave.
Sure, yeah.
And I haven't seen Schindler's List yet. It's on my list of, I need to get to the right headspace to watch that. But I'm not expecting it to be funny. I'm expecting to be devastated.
Yeah, it's like kind of hard to sell people. And I think this is like kind of where you get into that distinction of whether film is like an art form versus entertainment, because I don't know, if you see film as purely about entertainment, and a lot of people do, and there's not necessarily anything wrong with that, but then there's like no room for a filmmaker like you know, Michael Haneke, you know, someone that is like so aggressively trying to make the audience miserable.
Who is he?
So I did a recent video essay about his movie Benny's Video. He's a German filmmaker, or excuse me, I think Danish. I feel like that's one of those things that I just like say an ethnicity and then I don't want to get it wrong. Austrian. There we go. He's one of those German types. Yeah, no, Austrian filmmaker. His biggest movie would be Funny Games, which is kind of like a really miserable play on a slasher.
Okay.
Where, a slasher usually has fun with the blood and gore. And instead of that, it focuses more on people screaming in pain for long periods of time and just leaving you with the victims.
Mm-hmm.
And it's supposed to just kind of make you like, oh man, why do we like this genre of movie? This is so miserable. And the killers will like address the camera, wink before they do an act of violence to kind of implicate you, like, this is what you're here to see, right?
Okay.
It's not a fun movie to watch, but I think that like him as a director, he's very valuable. There's a lot I get out of his movies, but it's not like I'm having fun watching most of his movies.
So you've kind of touched on this, and I'd like to explore it a little more. I have an idea of how I would term it, but what would you consider is a cinephile, and do you consider yourself one?
Yeah, I think at this point I would consider myself one. I jokingly, like I said, kind of call myself a remedial cinephile, just because there are people I follow on social media or whatever that are cinephiles, and I will never have that level of encyclopedic knowledge of film that they do. So like, it always feels a bit presumptuous to call myself that,
It's a bit
But yeah, it is. But it is like, yeah, I do think there is a difference, between like generally a casual moviegoer and a cinephile. I think what differentiates it, when I was thinking on that question, was whether you'll actively seek out a movie because of like a broad interest you have, I think is a thing that is the definer. So like, not just picking out a movie because you're scrolling through Netflix and you see the description, you're like, oh, this seems good. Not that there's anything wrong with that, or you see the trailer and you're like, I want to see that, or because a friend recommended it. But it's like, you like this director and now you are willing to hunt down some like lost movie of theirs, like that's when you've reached that level. I think is like when, and you might not even like it. That's I think that's where it starts like developing like a collector kind of relationship where you're like, well, I have to see this. It's probably not good, but
it's like a curiosity, like, well, what else is there?
Yeah. I think it's once you've left the fear of like, will this entertain me or not? So I think a lot of people are scared of watching a movie that they'll leave going, that didn't entertain me. It's like once you've got out of that and you're just like, I don't know, just seeking something out of just curiosity. That I think is where it kind of is a difference.
Yeah. No, I would agree. I thinking about it in the terms of books as well, because I studied English literature, and I read a lot of books that most people will not read. And I think there's a lot of value to them. But I understand why most people will not read them, because a lot of them are very difficult to get through. And it wasn't always fun. In fact, some of them were never fun. Like Wuthering Heights. I never I never said this was fun. But I could appreciate it. And when I was done, I was glad I made the effort.
Yeah.
And I think the same with some movies. If I'm watching it, not just because I want to have fun, but because I either want to see how this actor portrayed a role, I'm curious to see how this director did it, or, as you mentioned, it's a subject that is interesting. For example, I've been getting really into Japanese movies, and I started with Godzilla, and that was a nice introduction to it.
That's great, yeah.
But I've been watching some of Seijun Suzuki's movies, and they are really weird. And
yeah.
I'm on the third one, and I'm like, okay, well, I just want to keep seeing more to see if they're all this weird, and to find out what makes these movies tick, because they're not a type of movie I would make. And I think he's someone who, as I understand it, he took as much latitude as he was given, maybe even more so. Like, from what I understand is, for Tokyo Drifter, he had been warned a couple times by the CEO, and like, you need to make a more normal movie. And he's like, oh, I'm just gonna. He probably said I'm going to, and then he just went ahead and still kept doing
Just
his
made
own
his own
thing.
thing. Yeah.
And so I've got this curiosity. I'm like, well, I just got to keep checking out more stuff by him. Like, and with Wes
Yeah.
Anderson, I'm like, okay, is he seriously going to do the same thing in every movie, slightly differently? And then it's like, on the one hand, I think, well, why do I keep watching this? Nobody talks like this in real life. This dialogue is so unbelievable. And then another
Yeah.
part of me is like, I've got to see how he keeps doing this in the next one.
See, this is something I like about Wes Anderson though too, is that I think his popularity is really interesting because realism is kind of the consensus mode of a lot of film now, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and he's so aggressively not doing that. He's very much in a more formalist mode. He's very much about style and about, you know, dialogue that is not naturalistic and stuff like that. And so it's kind of cool that he's one of the few directors I think still around that like is been able to keep himself out of that what's just become the norm,
Mm-hmm.
like so I do actually like really appreciate his ability to kind of keep that going, to
Mm-hmm.
kind of make the same movie over and over. I
Yeah.
think I'm glad he's able to do that because there's not a lot of like the studios have gotten such a stranglehold that such a stranglehold on film that you don't get to see people do indulgent stuff as
Mm-hmm.
much anymore. So like even if I don't always love it, I'm still like happy someone's able to do it still.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Although I still actually really liked the last few Wes Anderson movies. I know they've had split receptions, but I liked Asteroid City and
Yeah.
French Dispatch.
I I didn't like French Dispatch as much, but I did
Yeah,
like Asteroid City and the Grand Budapest Hotel. I think is my favorite of his.
yeah. My favorite of his is Darjeeling Limited. I don't know, that movie got me. I love that movie.
Nice. Yeah, that was certainly a crazy one.
Yeah, well, it's the one that's got the most like one of the more tonal whiplash sides of Wes Anderson because it's like cutesy in his normal way sometimes, but then that's also the one where it just gets really bleak,
Hmm.
at random moments. It's the okay, here's the Wes Anderson movie about death.
Did you see the Wes Anderson shorts on Netflix?
I haven't watched them yet.
Okay,
Are they any good?
they're they're interesting. I think visually they're it's got that Netflix
It's
feel
oh
where
okay.
it's it definitely looks like a Wes Anderson film, but it feels um, very much smaller scale.
It's got the sheen, that like Netflix sheen
Yeah,
over it. I don't know.
I
Yeah.
think I'd be curious to talk with you sometime about this when you've seen it. I think for me the he wanted to do it like it was being narrated, and so the
Uh,
narration was sometimes a bit distracting. It's like, okay, well, we're
okay.
not reading a book, we're watching a movie, and
Yeah.
the narrator would just look at the camera and talk.
Okay. All right.
So that
That
was
sounds a bit annoying.
it, and I don't remember which actor it was, but one of them had a very monotone voice, and it was like, okay. But Ben Kingsley was in quite a few of them, and he was great. So I think it's worth watching for his performances.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, that was interesting. I didn't put this on our topic for conversations, but what do you feel about streamers like Netflix trying to entice directors with huge amounts of money to make exclusive content?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know because I don't love it, but also I can't tell if that's like a bias because like what is the meaningful difference between that and like I don't know, the studio era, being what it was, like Is it a resist? Do I not like it because it's a newer version of an old problem, and I'm being inconsistent there,
Mm-hmm.
or I don't know. I think that it just kind of, I mean, the result, like the resulting thing that comes out of it is just really up to is the director,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes they thrive under those conditions and sometimes they don't, I know like Scorsese or whatever has been able to make some pretty good movies that got released on Netflix, right? 'Cause The Irishman
Uh,
was released on Netflix.
I'm not sure, but I think he's also done. Didn't he do something for Apple TV as well?
Yeah, yeah, I think he's done. It's, and so like I think like our artists are always just having to figure out how to get
Yeah.
funding for their stuff. And so I don't fault anyone for taking up the offer.
Right.
But like what does it mean about the broader state of movies? I don't know. Probably nothing good.
And, as a physical movie collector, I dislike it for two reasons, and one is that
Yeah.
they don't get the physical release, which means it's up to you. You're kind of tethered to the streamer if you want to see it.
Yeah. Yeah, if they just decide they don't want to have it up anymore, they
Yeah.
could just do that.
Well, that's the second thing is because of that. There's no real well. There's very little archiving that happens. When physical copies exist, I feel like okay, you can track it down, you can get a copy of it, things like that. But when it's only on the streaming site, there may be ways to get copies, but it's less, and also it's going to
Hmm.
be at a lower quality.
Sure.
And I understand why directors might jump for these um, offers because the streamers can generally offer them a lot more money or perhaps even more creative control than a studio would.
Hmm.
And so I think it might be better for them, but I sometimes wonder if it's worse for the consumer down the road because I can think of shows 3 years ago that were on Netflix as new shows, and now I can't find them because they just
Yeah.
removed them, and that was their own content. They spent money to make it, and they just decided it's not it's not worth keeping. And well, one of my favorite Netflix originals is the Knives Out, a Glass Onion mystery, or the Glass
Yeah,
Onion, a
yeah.
Knives Out mystery. And I think that's something that I've actually gone back and intentionally rewatched, several times. And but my fear is that 5 years down the road, if they
They'll
don't
just yank it.
if they
Yeah.
don't do a release, it's like, well, you can't find it.
That's a great point. And it is something to be worried about because I mean that we've kind of seen that a bit happen a bit with Warner Bros. David Zaslav like famously had like what was it like a couple different movies that I
Yeah,
think he just like they were done
yeah,
and they
yeah.
just scrapped them for a tax write off.
Can you imagine how
Just
frustrating that would be to work on it and not be able to
yeah.
show your family, your friends, what you did?
Yeah, it's like yeah, I just did like several years of work so this guy could get a tax write off. That's terrible. I hate it.
Yeah, I love in the physical media scene. I love that there's boutiques like
Mhm.
Criterion and Arrow Video, Vinegar Syndrome, and others that are
Yeah.
going to restore older films. And I just think, man, I hope that there's something for newer films too, because I think some newer films deserve to be preserved, and it's kind of
Hmm.
scary when it's up to a company that doesn't care about art. They only care about profit.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
So, kind of getting back to our earlier conversation, when you talked about being a cinephile and wanting to see movies because you wanted to be either part of the conversation or you
Hmm.
wanted to see see what everyone was talking about, what was a movie that you checked out that you probably wouldn't have, before you'd had this kind of change of perspective, like that's definitely would
Hmm.
not have been on your normal radar.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, I'd say I watch a lot of movies just to like see what the fuss is, partially out of that impulse to like catch up with classics or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. Um, but I don't know. Maybe I probably would have still watched this, even if there hadn't been the fuss. But the one that came to mind was most recently watching the Gospel According to Saint Matthew,
Okay.
because I'd heard that was like the best Jesus movie, supposedly. So I was like, okay, fine. It's Easter. I'll watch the best Jesus movie.
Nice.
And it was great. So I mean, it was worth it. I see why people like it so much. Um, yeah, I mean, in general, I think most of the movies I watch, or like half, ones that maybe I watched that I wouldn't normally watch, but because of hype, I the one that keeps coming to mind right now, like maybe less hype, but more just that I was like, okay, I want to explore the French New Wave, and I was watching The Umbrellas of Cherbourg, and that's like a musical, and I
Okay.
don't like musicals. I loved it though. It's like that's a great movie, but I only watched it because of its connection to a
Mm-hmm.
film movement and the kind of general consensus around that film movement being the origin point for a lot of great film. But you know,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
So when you mentioned classics, and of course you and I know
Mhm.
there's the people that are like the classics are the best. There's nothing great
Yeah,
after
yeah.
like 1960, 70, wherever they draw the line. And then there's people who are like, well, I'm not watching something that's old or whatever. How how do you approach classic movies? And what do you find surprises you most about diving into those?
Yeah. Classic, like it's a like loaded concept, like it is in any art
Mm-hmm.
form. Because I don't know, when you're talking about like the canon or classics or whatever, that's a necessarily exclusive concept, and both in a good way and a bad way. In a good way in the sense that it excludes bad movies.
Mm-hmm.
It excludes movies that maybe, weren't particularly interesting at the time they came out. They were just one in a million. But or one of a million. But on the other hand, it's exclusive because, like what a more good faith version of the I don't watch old movies kind of person will say is usually like, well, there's no black representation in a certain era, or there's
Mm-hmm.
no, it's all white dudes or whatever. And that's true. Like that there is, I mean, this is famously a problem. I just think the solution to that problem with any art form is you should watch more movies,
Mm-hmm.
or read more books. It's like it's not that you should throw out the dusty white guy authors, because
Mm-hmm.
they also are really good writers. They are put in the canon, I think, often for a reason.
Yeah.
It's just you should expand
Right.
what you're reading. You should also read the black authors. You should also, and the same thing goes with film, I think, is it's how what's recognized as a classic is always going to be a loaded concept, and it's going to come from,
Mm-hmm.
patriarchy, whatever. Like that's all going to contribute. So I think the best way is just like don't write off a classic because it's a classic,
Yeah.
but also be willing to watch more than just what's considered a canonical classic, because that's just,
Mm-hmm.
it's always going to have a bias because of that. And I think also watching classics is a good thing to do because, one, some of them aren't as good as everyone acts like they are. And so, you could kind of have that moment of being like, oh, this is overhyped. On the other hand, some of them are great, and they're just so commonly praised that you become numb to how good they might actually be until you
Right.
go back and watch it. Citizen Kane was the example I gave earlier of like, it is so praised, it's considered the greatest movie of all time, la di da di da, to a point you never want to watch it
Yeah.
because it has such a reputation. You're like, it'll probably be boring and high art, and then it's really entertaining, and it's a really good,
Mhm.
fun use of a few hours.
Yeah. What I find interesting about watching classics, and I'll admit I am
Mhm.
someone who has a lot of classics on my watch list because I haven't
Yeah, yeah.
seen that many. I am always surprised at what they considered scandalous.
Oh, that's always funny.
Like, oh,
Yeah.
she was out with a man late without someone else. But like they were just like walking or whatever. It's like,
Yeah, well, it's like there's like in It's a Wonderful Life how there's when uh why am I blanking on Donna Reed's character? Jesus. Um when in It's a Wonderful Life where they're talking about like somebody being pregnant.
mm-hmm.
It's so funny to hear them like skirt around the word pregnant or whatever, and
Yeah.
like it's fine, you don't really notice it too much unless you're looking for it, but then it's really funny where you're like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, they're going through that much work not to say the word pregnant.
Mm-hmm. I I saw a. I'm used to black and white movies being, generally pretty tame.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
watched a black and white Japanese movie that had nudity, and I'm like, oh wow, I'm just not used to this because I just in my mind I associate black and white with classics, with
Yeah.
you know, you can't show much more skin than like up to the shoulder.
The things that like break that down in your head is like watching more French New Wave, because that's
Hmm.
they're in that weird little gap where that was still using a lot of black and white, but then they'll do stuff that's way more modern than you expect. And also this is like one of those things that's it's in the back of my head as to explore more, but I haven't done yet, is pre-code Hollywood stuff, because there's a weird little period of time before the Hays Code
Yeah,
really took over, and the movies were like really risque, at least for
yeah.
for audiences
And
at
those
that
were
time.
silence, right?
Yeah, there was silent ones. I think there was a few. I have to double check that. I think there was some with audio.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
did hear that because I watched a documentary on nudity once, and they mentioned that, and I thought that was really interesting. How, you know, kind of like before there were the rules, they're like, oh, kind of anything goes, and then
Yeah. Well, I mean, this also gets into like one of my reoccurring interests is exploitation films, and there's an era of that I find most actually the stuff I like most tends to be like 70s and 80s exploitation movies, but an era I find interesting and go back to a lot is like during the Hays Code, during more of that censorship, the movies that found ways around that, by being like, this is an educational movie about nudist camps.
hmm
I don't know. I find that really, it's really interesting to see this blurring of like educational and then clearly just trying to find a way that you could make a movie with nudity.
yeah.
Yeah.
Do you remember what the first R-rated movie was that you ever saw?
Yeah, that one it was Excalibur,
Okay.
which I still love that movie. I rewatched it a couple years ago and it holds up. It rocks. The movie
Nice.
rules.
I remember the first one I saw was The Matrix, which is about as tame of an R-rated movie as you can
Yeah.
get.
Yeah, no, I remember Excalibur feeling so adult, and so it was like kind of funny to rewatch it as an adult now. And I mean, it's got a sex scene and some violence, but it's
Mhm.
not like the most risque thing in the world. And it's so much goofier than I remembered in a good sense, but like it's so much more campy. It felt
Mhm.
so serious and adult when I was watching it as a kid, and then I'm like, oh no, they're just going nuts with a fog machine. Like, it's,
Have do you think that your sensibilities about movies have changed? And by that I mean like what you're okay with, what you're not okay with, have changed. And if so,
yeah.
how do you think that's gone progressed?
Yeah. I mean, I think it also lines up with me, leaving evangelical Christianity. Being part of it is I had a much more like strong moralistic sense of what it's okay to depict in a movie versus not.
Hmm.
That's mostly gone for me now, with some exceptions, obviously. I mean, and something I think where I've switched from is going from like, okay, this is a thing that should never be depicted in a movie, to this is something that needs to be carefully depicted if it's depicted, stuff like
Hmm.
that. Um, but I think like I would say a lot of stuff in high school that I was kind of repeating what people said about like, you know, uh, talking about gratuitous violence or gratuitous sex in a movie or whatever, and
Mm-hmm.
oh, it should serve a function or whatever. And I think I've completely lost that as a
Yeah.
mentality where I'm just like, I don't know, why is anything in a movie ever like we don't do this with any other subject. We don't go like, oh, well, why is this specific type of scene in this movie?
Mm-hmm.
Does it have to serve a structural purpose? I don't know. Sometimes no, and that's like fine.
You know, I with there's almost nobody doing that. George Orwell, he's got some essays where he analyzes movies like there's too much depiction of capitalism. There's very little depiction of workers' rights in this movie.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
he's
yeah.
like the exception.
Yeah, he's kind of an exception proving the rule there because I don't know. That was what I think it dawned on me is I was like the way people, for instance, would talk about sex in a movie a lot, being
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, why is this scene necessary? And I'm like, I think that question only makes sense if you think it's somewhat morally wrong to put that in a movie, and I just don't.
Yeah.
so so that question is nonsense to me.
Yeah.
Like why is it all right? Why is it necessary for any aspect of the plot in this movie to happen?
Yeah, similar to you, I grew up in a, very conservative evangelical background.
Mhm.
And, I was very, own it, I was very prudish about sex and
Yeah,
nudity. And I, there were some movies that I would like skip through every time something happened. And I think about it now, and it was so tame in comparison to what I watch
yeah, yeah.
now. And yet I was so embarrassed. I was embarrassed even if I was the only one watching it. And I think it just kind of over time it wore off when I realized, this is mainly a construct that
Mhm.
I developed through the hyper conscious purity culture that is part of evangelicalism, and that's a topic for a whole nother day.
That's a whole other thing. Yeah.
But when I realized I don't care if people that I knew when I was more active in the church
Mhm.
know that I see this movie, I just don't care. And I
Yeah.
realized, I've actually kind of flip flopped. I've become, kind of okay with nudity. And in some ways, I've become less okay with violence. I used to say, oh, I don't care
Yeah, yeah.
about violence, but I don't want any sex or nudity. And now I'm kind of at the point where I say, well, the nudity doesn't generally bother me, but some of the violence sometimes still does.
I'm pretty okay with both, but I think yeah, when I logically think of it, it's more like it is kind of weird those two things are treated the same, right? Because it's
Hmm.
like, okay, here's a scene of two loving people having a consensual moment together,
Yeah.
and here's a guy getting brutally murdered.
Hmm.
Why was it when I was growing up, most of the adults in my life were more okay with the brutal murder?
Yeah, exactly.
And me seeing that,
Yeah. I think it's because they have this idea, well, of course you're not going to be a murderer, but you might have
right, but I
sex. Oh
but
no.
I could be a yeah. That's true. That's probably a good point.
Yeah, it's funny to laugh about because
Sure, yeah.
we were there, we know so many people who came through that, and we come to the other side and we're like, okay, that's just kind of, it was kind of ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah,
Like
it was.
you think about some movie that had maybe, let's say, 30 seconds of nudity, and that was the deciding factor where some people said, I will not watch that. And
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, I just like I don't yeah, I have a hard time relating to that anymore, even though I
mhm.
did at one point have a similar
it,
mentality. I just
you mentioned this earlier, but watching more foreign movies really helps you realize that some ideas are just American,
yeah.
and that other people don't have quite the same hangups. They might have different hangups, but they don't necessarily have the
Yeah.
same ones. Like I I watched this movie on HBO Max. Not not particularly amazing, but it was
Mhm.
interesting enough that I watched the whole thing. It
Sure.
was called I forget the French name, but it was two English girls where basically
Mhm.
these girls from England are in France and they meet this guy and he kind of he's a crush on both of them.
Mhm.
And so he's with one girl but he's thinking of the other, and it's just kind of very melodramatic. It's not great,
Uh,
but I was for some reason
Sounds
later
like a gender reversal of Jules and Jim. If you ever seen that one,
I haven't,
yeah,
but
it's a pretty good movie.
but by the end of it, he's slept with both of them at different times, and they both dumped him because they both basically thought he was very immature,
Yeah, yeah,
essentially. But one thing that I recall from that movie that was just blew my mind is
yeah.
he's living in Paris and he's in his apartment and he's got some other girlfriend that but it's so he's just
This is so
embracing her and
French. Yeah,
she's naked and his mother just walks in and she's like, here's your laundry or something, and then she just walks out like completely nonplussed that she just saw her son and some girl there. And I'm like,
yeah,
the American response would be like, oh, don't come in, blah blah blah, and
yeah.
he's just like, yeah, okay. Yeah, and I don't know if that's typical of French culture because again, my most of my understanding of French culture comes from just a few movies. But
Sure, yeah.
it was hilarious because I thought you'd never see an American movie like that.
No, no. I mean, that's so French. Everything you just described in that
Yeah.
movie too. Like yeah, that's a consistent thing you'll run into with like a lot of European movies. Is like definitely a less of a emphasis on monogamy.
Yeah.
Uh, that's yeah, yeah. I mean, like or not even just French. Like Bergman. So what Swedish?
Oh, I really want to see his movies.
You should. They're great. But like there's a character in Fanny and Alexander who's just like, a lovable character that is just kind of one of the family members, and he's just like an uncle that's like just constantly cheating on his wife, and it's just that's the joke.
Yeah.
It's just he's the guy who has always got a mistress. And I don't know, like I don't feel like that joke would play as well in the US.
Yeah.
Because it would be like, well, why isn't like everybody confronting him about it? Like why isn't this serious? It's like, I don't know. In Sweden, I guess they just see it as like oh, that's just what he does.
Hmm.
I don't know if that's good or bad. I don't have any opinion on that, but it's definitely different.
What do you think was one of the most shocking or really surprising foreign movies that you've seen?
Hmm. I think part of why I latched onto Haneke was because of that. Actually,
Okay.
like I mentioned earlier, his movies have like, a level of shock that I found really compelling at a certain point. Aside from that, though, yeah, I think in general, like I don't know if explicitly said this, but I just am really interested in shock in media, in media in general.
Hmm.
Like I am kind of I don't know, I kind of attracted to a certain edgelordism that probably, that's the stuff I know I don't like recommend to people. That's just for
Yeah.
me. But like, I don't know. I guess maybe you could say like a Lars von Trier's stuff might
Hmm.
also be in that, where that level of shock is like what I found compelling about it. I don't know.
Hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, it feels like I'm just dipping my toes into foreign movies, but I'm
Yeah.
wading deeper, and I really like trying to figure out what the cultural values are through
Yeah.
the movie without them explicitly telling it to me, because I'm trying to figure
Yeah.
out, and you have to watch a lot of films because not everyone's going to have the same ideas.
Hmm.
The one of the Suzuki films I watched recently, uh, I'm probably pronouncing it incorrectly, Zeigenweisen,
Mm.
and it was a really interesting movie. It felt a lot like some of the postmodern existentialist stuff I've read
Yeah. Sure.
because all these weird things keep happening throughout the movie. Like he hears voices, and nobody seems to agree on where the voice came from, but he's sure he had
Mhm.
it. Things are happening that seem someone said something and then later they don't remember it, and just this feeling of okay, things are off all the whole movie, and it gets progressively stranger through the to the end. And at the
Yeah.
end, this one character just straight up talks to the main character and says, "You're dead." And well, they say it a little bit more that they said, "That's you know, you made an agreement with your friend that he could have your bones when you die, and you're already dead. That's why you're seeing all these things." And it's just a what? It's kind of a mind fuck moment at the end of the movie because
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
expecting some reveal like, oh, there's a ghost that's been messing around, and then it's just no, he's dead.
No, you're dead.
And as I understand that his movies may be were a little weird even for perhaps Japanese tastes, but I'm enjoying that
Mhm.
the movies about Japanese home life between husband and wife. It's seen okay, what's similar, what's different. That's to me is
Yeah.
something that's a secondary thing about foreign films that's really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a big thing that is part of my one of my kind of obsessions I return to a lot is like Eastern European film.
Mm-hmm.
And I think especially stuff that comes out of the Soviet years. And I'm interested in it because of that, because those movies were really like a lot of the kind of like the Czech New Wave and some of those kind of movements were obsessed with realism.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were trying to capture what like everyday life was like for people, in the Soviet system or whatever. And with it being so different, but, still obviously there being, similarities, but so different from life here. That's, I think, something I'm always attracted to and interested by is
Mm-hmm.
like, you know, uh, I think like Bellatar's is a favorite, one of my favorites. Hungarian director, and he's got, I think it's one of his earlier films. Is like depicting, a family crammed in social housing that they
Okay.
they can't afford to, or not afford, but they can't get accepted for a bigger apartment, and so like a lot of the tension is just about like having way too large of a family crammed into this small apartment.
Okay.
um and so yeah, I don't know, like those are little things that are interesting to me because I wouldn't it's just a different social situation than I live in. So
One of the ways that I find movies I want to see is browsing the Criterion Collection and just
sure,
reading
yeah,
the
yeah,
descriptions. And there's a lot of interesting movies that I'm like, oh, I've got to check out that one. I've got to check out that
yeah,
one.
yeah,
What
yeah.
when it comes to movies that people like say Citizens Kane or 12 Angry
Mm-hmm.
Men, where they're like, this is great, you've got to see it. Do you feel
Mm-hmm.
like you go into it any differently when you expect it to be good, or do you try to be disinterested, if that is even possible?
I definitely go into, because I think that sometimes like I think it comes from like trying to have a degree of humility about it, where it's like I'm gonna go in to this canonical classic and kind of try to see why it's considered a canonical classic. And sometimes I will watch a movie and genuinely be like, I do not understand why this is a classic. But
Mm-hmm.
I think it's worth trying, because I think if there is a big enough tradition that has been built around this is a great movie, it is sometimes worth it to go, maybe I'm not seeing something if I'm not getting this. There the I think people are sometimes a little scared of that because everybody wants to have an original take on a movie, and it feels like groupthink or whatever to be like, maybe I'm wrong and the movie's right. Like maybe I need to like think about that. But
Mm-hmm.
I think like that's the only way you really grow artistically. Because like if you were a kid, like as a kid, never, as you're growing up engaging with media, never like had to kind of force yourself to like something, I don't think you ever like would develop that relationship with art long term, because you have to have that desire to be like, okay, this is considered a great, why is it a great, let's like I am the one that has to figure that out. The movie isn't going to tell me why it's great.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
I think being willing to try things more than once is
That's
It's a
huge.
indicator of maturity that I wish more people embraced, because I think
Yeah.
so many people are so quick to give up, or to say, it's not working for me. I'm like, well, can you maybe consider
Mhm.
that you weren't at a space you could perceive it the first time, receive it the first time,
Yeah.
or to consider that, maybe the first time was a little rough, but now you know kind of what to expect. Maybe you'll notice more details.
Yeah. I mean, there's a bunch. Yeah, I think rewatching a movie is a really great thing. Like, example of that is my favorite noir is Detour, by Edgar G. Ulmer. Is the director of that. And the first time I watched that, it was just kind of thrown on by my dad. I think it was a noir, and I thought that was okay. And I think I gave it like 3 stars on Letterboxd. And then between when I watched it then and when I rewatched it, I watched a lot of noirs.
Mm-hmm.
And after having done that and going back, I was like, oh my God, this is like such a tight, like amazing execution of this genre that I think I didn't appreciate because I hadn't really seen many other movies from that era at the time.
Yeah.
Um, so like I think that's part of it, but then also like your own personal growth, right? Like I think there's a movie you could watch when you're a kid, and you're like, I don't get that because it's a movie about like aging or something. And then you watch it when you're a little older and it's like, oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
I understand this feeling. And then yeah, like what you had said about going in now you know what to expect. Sometimes a movie warrants a rewatch, I think, because the first time you watch it, it shocks you or something like
Mm-hmm.
that. And that's the effect. And then the second time you watch it, it's about, okay, how does this all fit together? Like, like Mulholland Drive, the David Lynch movie, I think is a good example of this because the first time if you watch it for the first time, there is an abrupt moment when the characters change names and suddenly all the actors are playing different characters. And when you first watch that, that's infuriating.
I haven't seen it yet, but I feel it's on my list, so I will.
Yeah. And you will likely get frustrated at it the first time you watch it because it does that. But the more I've thought about the movie, the more I've been itching for a rewatch already. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it just, you have to be in the right headspace for a movie. Sometimes aren't in the right headspace for it. And so watching it again will help. And I think in general, this kind of gets to something I think people struggle with, that because of that fear of watching something that won't be entertaining to you. I think people like really brush up against when something's too weird for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, like I think kind of interpret when something is weird or makes you uncomfortable as the filmmaker is failing.
Yeah.
Like they're failing at entertaining me and not like maybe that it wants you to feel uncomfortable in this moment,
Mm-hmm.
or that maybe the movie knows this is a really weird thing to do.
Yeah. Did you ever read the novella "The Awakening" by Kate Chopin?
No,
Okay. Are you familiar with the general
no, I'm
story?
not.
So it was written in, I'm trying to remember, 1800s.
Hmm.
Um, set down in Louisiana, and it's about this woman who is of the genteel, landowning class,
Sure.
and they have a plantation, and they spend their holiday at the beach, and she develops an attraction to one of the people there.
Hmm.
But and he initially is like against it, and then he kind of was like, oh, maybe I will indulge this, and then he changes his mind. I'm trying to remember. I think that his family pressured him to stop spending time because people were talking, and it was
Hmm.
becoming a scandal. And she ends up swimming out to sea. It ends kind of ambiguously, but the you're in the you one way to read it is that she swam off to freedom. But the most probable and most likely way to read it is that she drowned. She was swimming. She felt like she was finally free, um, because and there's more to the story than this, but basically it's a very feminist idea of she's hasn't been allowed to identify herself, to own her own identity. Her identity's always been as a mother, as wife, taking care of her husband's needs, not causing a stir, doing what is expected. And she ends up bucking those trends, and almost everyone deserts her, is shocked. When I read it in high school, it was an assigned reading. I did not like it because I said, she is a bad mom. She has abandoned her kids, blah, blah, blah.
Right, yeah.
And then I was assigned it in college, and I'd grown in more maturity, and I'm like, okay, well, I still think she's a bad person, but I can understand some of the arguments that that the author is making. And I reread it last year, and I really liked it. It was, I thought, this, it's not a perfect by any means, because does not talk about the level of wealth that can only come from the slave owning aspects, but as a caricature of a woman and her struggles that she is dealing with, it was really well written. And I just realized, okay, if I had not read it again after reading it in high school, I would have missed out on so much genuine pleasure last year, because even though it has such a bleak ending, it's so well written. I appreciated the journey. And I think some movies are like that, where, okay, you appreciate the whole experience more the second time, even though you know what's going to happen. It's because you can say, oh, I never noticed how well this one supporting person acted. They acted the hell out of that role. And you didn't realize how, okay, if this is how it ends, how did they get me to feel that way? And it's because the director, kind of maneuvered your feelings, your emotions, based on the script and how the progression of the movie. And you can appreciate that, even if you still don't like the ending. You can say, wow, that's... You can appreciate... I'm sorry, I'm just repeating myself. You appreciate the details, and you don't have to summarize it purely by, did I like it? Or even, did I agree with it? And that took a long time for me to come to the point in books and in movies to say, it's okay. I don't have to judge everything by whether or not it conforms to the conservative Judeo-Christian perspective I grew up with. But I can actually try to analyze it on just, is it a compelling story? And also, what was I feeling? I can think about what I was feeling, and sometimes, I don't like what I'm feeling, but it's interesting that they got those emotions out of me, because if something is really bad and really boring, I don't remember it. I can think of, I don't remember the stuff that's just disposable. But I still remember some books, and I still remember some movies or TV shows where I'm like, oh, I can't believe they did that.
Absolutely. No, I 100% agree.
Did you ever see the movie House of Flying Daggers?
No, I have not.
So that's a Mandarin film. It is very beautifully shot, has an absolute downer of an ending. And when I saw it when it came out, and I was probably either in high school or just out of high school, and I thought, man, I did not like that movie. It was so cool up to the end. And then I watched it again last year, and almost 20 years later, maybe even more than 20 years later, and I thought, you know what? I could appreciate the ending. I didn't have to be happy for me to like the
Yeah.
movie.
No, you don't. Yeah, sometimes. Yeah, I mean, sometimes something having a miserable ending is like what will leave it. I don't know, most
Hmm.
impactful in your head. I don't know. Like there's always a something I think worthwhile in art. Art isn't supposed to just make you have good feelings. And I think it's bad to have that mentality that it is supposed to only make you have good feelings. And I think there are a lot of people that do have that mentality now.
Hmm.
And I'm like just so the opposite. Like I think I have the problem of not watching enough stuff that has like happy stuff. I don't think I watch enough happy stuff. Um yeah, I think I have a kind of a tendency to be attracted to stuff that's bleak, and that's probably not a good thing. But
Do you think that maybe your attraction to the bleakness is because you, like me, you had so many doses of you life must be happy, and you know that
yeah,
life isn't always happy, and I want to see people who are not afraid to admit it.
yeah. Also, I mean, on top of like we haven't talked too much about like politics in movies, but that's of course a big part of like what I'm watching and analyzing stuff. That's a lens I take to a lot of stuff. I don't feel like the current state of politics is happy.
Right.
And in general, I don't think as a culture we're happy. And so I don't love art that kind of feels like it's lying to me about where we're at.
Hmm.
And I think there's a lot of movies that do kind of do that. Not that a movie can't be fun, but especially if a movie tries to be about the moment or about something specific. Like I don't think a happy ending is always a good thing at this current moment. Maybe not even responsible to
Yeah.
do at times.
What are some movies that ended up being so much better than you thought they would be? Like you watched it, but
Oh
you
yeah.
you went in with the expectation of, okay, this is overrated or it's gonna be generic, and
Yeah. Oh man. There's definitely some examples of this, but now I'm like scrolling through Letterbox to see an example because I
I'm guessing for you it'd probably be like a blockbuster because I know you tend to kind of avoid the more mainstream films.
yeah, I mean I do like a good blockbuster. My thing is usually with like I'm not a huge fan of the Marvel stuff, although I have been working through them because I feel like I need to understand the culture. And maybe not that I had a low expectation, but one example is the movie Descent, which is just a horror movie set in like caves.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it just seemed like it was going to be a fun time and just a good horror movie, but it was so well executed. I was kind of like stunned that I like go back and think on that movie frequently. I think it would definitely be some horror movies because I think like I love horror, but I go in with low expectations for
Yeah.
horror, especially if it's just like one I found on Tubi or something. And so I'm always like a bit mind blown when there's something that I went in with that expectation of this will be kind of just a disposable horror movie, and then it's like genuinely moving. Um, I this is one of the things I like about Italian horror and exploitation movies, which are stuff I tend to go to a lot, is that there's a lot of garbage, but when you find the surprising good one, it's like really good.
Mm-hmm.
Like one of my I'd say my favorite giallo. I don't know if it's the best like one that captures the giallo thing, but it's the one I like the most is Don't Torture a Duckling. And I went into that movie thinking it was just going to be classic salacious Italian movie about a murder mystery. Got it.
Mm-hmm.
And I found it to be like a really stunning artistic movie that had a lot on its mind. Um, and part of that is because it does a bunch of these like genre reversals because in most giallos the salacious graphic brutal murder scenes you see are usually attractive young women. it's
Right.
it's where the slasher kind of pulls from those, right? And in that movie the victims are young boys, and it never shows those murders. You just find the bodies.
Mm-hmm.
But the time that you do get a close up look at a brutal thing is the townspeople lynching somebody that was ended up not the person responsible.
Oh wow.
And so it's really effective because it's not, like this is the brutal, gory scene, but it's not like, oh, look at the, the slasher. It doesn't fall into this like slasher giallo thing. It like uses it as a point of emphasis about like the way this town is rallied against the outsider.
Mm-hmm.
So,
What do you feel about genre films in general? Like, you mentioned horror, but do you feel
yeah.
like there are some genres that you just avoid on purpose, or are you open to anything?
I'm pretty much open to anything. Um, when people say genre movies, are usually, I know, talking about like horror and sci-fi and stuff like that. So with those, I'm completely open. I think probably if you count like, I don't know, like rom-com as a genre movie, that's probably one I don't seek out. But I've watched plenty that are really great, and I'm open to watch one. It's just not a thing I seek out.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for me, it's the shock comedy
Oh
is it's just almost never that funny to me,
yeah.
and I think people like it because it's shocking, but
Hmm.
to me, I don't find them funny. I'm like, yeah, shocking, yes, but
Yeah.
they're not comedies in my opinion.
What give me an example of like a shock comedy you're thinking of here.
Something like Hangover, super
Oh yeah.
bad.
Oh, okay. Yeah, they're fine.
Yeah, yeah.
That's kind of where
I feel like, to me, um, humor can be in any genre pretty much,
hmm
and so it's interesting to me to have a genre that's solely about, well, that's the stated goal is comedy.
comedy. Yeah.
And maybe this is because I have read a lot of plays, and so to me a comedy is a drama that has people in a lot of funny situations, and I think it's this, to me, I prefer the situational comedy to
hmm
just, oh look, I showed everyone my naked butthole by mistake. It's like that, I'm exaggerating, of course, but
No, yeah, I got
that's,
you.
you know, I feel like that doesn't support a whole movie, in my opinion.
No, yeah. Yeah, that those I generally don't go to, but I mean there's exceptions to that, I'm sure. But yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Not a huge like super bad fan. I think it got a few laughs out of me,
Hmm.
probably.
I
Hangover, yeah.
I watched a movie. It was kind of, in that raunchy comedy genre
hmm
where this woman is sent to Spain for work, and her friends come along and they're bad news, and they bring her into all sorts of terrible situations. And
Yeah.
by the end of the movie, I thought, man, this is just a good case for not having friends. Like, if your friends are going to take you to the club, get you drugged up, and all sorts of things that happen, it's like, man, just cut them
Don't
loose.
know. Cut them loose. Not good friends.
What are some movies that you couldn't finish, and
Mm,
what would make you abandon a film? I have a friend who said, "Oh, I can always finish any movie," and I actually feel like I abandon a lot of movies most of the time because I'm bored. But just curious how you feel
yeah.
about that.
I'm closer to where your friend's at, where I kind of have a compulsion to finish a movie if I start it. Um, so it has to be really bad. And not even bad in an interesting way. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
not bad in a way we'll have something to say about it even. It has to be like this is nothing to me. Don't I don't care about this. Like I don't remember the name of it, but my girlfriend threw on a found footage movie the other day about like that was filmed from like The found footage being from like one of those door camera things, which
Okay.
could be a good premise if you had a good story for it, but
Mhm.
it didn't. And I didn't watch the rest of it. I like kind of watched it for about 10 minutes and I was like, I don't need to see this. Like, it's fine.
Yeah.
I'll live. But this actually kind of connects to one of the other questions you had sent me ahead of time, was how has Letterboxd changed the way you watch movies?
Mm-hmm.
Letterboxd has made me more of a person to finish a movie.
I gotta log
because
it.
I want to log it, even if that log is me giving it 1 star and going bad.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't usually rate movies unless I finished them. But if I feel like I watched enough and I like skipped forward and it's still bad, then I might be like, you know what, I can tell there's no redemption. Because I will throw on a movie on Tubi to have in the background while I'm doing other stuff. But then sometimes I'm like, oh, this is
terrible.
This is so... And then also, conversely, I also will put on a movie that is too interesting, and then I will also stop it because, I'm trying to find that right mix of something I can casually pay attention to, but if I realize, oh, I'm invested in this, I don't want to be distracted, because I know some people, they like to play on their phones when they watch movies, but if I want to watch a movie, I am there. I'm not on my phone. I just zoomed in.
The only phone stuff I tend to do is I'll occasionally do like Googling or IMDb or that kind of stuff. That I kind of compulsively do.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm looking at that stuff too much and I'm not really paying attention to the movie, that means the movie's not good, or at least it's not capturing my attention. Maybe it's good, but I'm not.
Yeah,
it's not keeping my attention. Yeah.
What do you think's the difference between liking a movie for being fun and appreciating? We kind of talked about it before, but if someone were to ask you, what about a movie I didn't like? How would you describe your appreciation for a movie that you may have ultimately disagreed with, or had a very negative reaction? And I'll give you an example. I mentioned it earlier, the movie 12 Years a Slave. It was brutal in its depiction of slavery, but it was probably not as brutal as it actually was. And that was something I tried to keep in mind, is the violence. It was shocking for me. But, I'm seeing it for just, a few minutes here, a few minutes there. I didn't even live it, But the movie, it was so raw in its depictions. And I couldn't say I liked it or that I enjoyed any real part in the movie. There's kind of this feeling at the end where, okay, he does get reunited with his family, but you don't have this feeling of, oh, it's happy, but you have this feeling of he was wronged. He didn't he was freed, but he didn't get his life back, and it's just this feeling of a man destroyed by the system. Perhaps not irredeemably, but at least temporarily. And it was actually just fate that chance that he got free. That someone with some influence met him and was able to work things on his behalf. Because he was wrongfully captured and taken to the South and then brutally treated by the slave owner. And so I can say that I didn't like that movie, but I'm glad I saw it. I don't know that I'll ever see it again because it did its magic on me.
Yeah. Oh man, it's kind of tricky because I think I do have a masochistic streak. So the problem is I do kind of like a dark movie, like a movie that's upsetting. So on some level I do just kind of like that, but I also know what you're saying. Like, I think for me, the stuff where I have more of that divide between I appreciate this, but I didn't enjoy this, is less about the subject matter being really upsetting or the depictions really upsetting. But if it's like, it's usually when I get into more something that's more experimental. That's I think where I have that distinction, where it's like I didn't have fun watching this because it was, barely narrative, and it was kind of a kind of a slog, but I am interested in what it was doing. There's like a few movies from like Harmony Korine, for instance, I watched for an episode of Fruitless kind of recently, that like I appreciated what it was trying to do, but I didn't have any fun watching it.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really enjoy watching it because it was, it intentionally abrasive and intentionally non-narrative, and more about an aesthetic or something. So I think that's it. And then, but I also like, I don't know, then I have that distinction in my head too of like what's something that's fun to watch versus something that's maybe still kind of fun for me to watch but not for most people. I still have that distinction in my head, because I don't just like recommend come and see or something like that to people, even though I do love that movie. I do love some darker upsetting movies like that, but I don't know, I will recommend it to somebody with the caveats of like, this is a really dark and upsetting movie. I think it's the best movie about World War II ever made, though. So
Cool. And finally, what would be some advice you would give to a new cinephile, movie watcher, someone who says, I want to watch more than just what I like, but if they're not really sure where to start, because it can be intimidating, especially if you get on Letterboxd and there's all these top 200 lists and all these people who have so much more knowledge. What was some advice you would give to the person who wants to enter this world but perhaps doesn't know where to start?
I would say just watch movies, and you're gonna have stupid takes regardless. Like, regardless of what you're watching, in the beginning you're gonna be like, wow, this was great, and then what you end up realizing is, oh no, it's just I like this look of a movie, and it was the first one I saw that ever had that look. You're gonna have that regardless. Like, that's just gonna be part of it. But I think like just going back and forth between stuff that you find fun and then stuff that you like that are those like canonical classics. I think just going back and forth, like what helps you from ever feeling burnt out or making things feel too much like homework or whatever is just kind of rotating, like watch a fun genre movie, then go, try to watch a French New Wave movie or something. And that, and then I think what kind of will help you grow on that front is just having an interest in interest in directors and stuff like that, in the making of the movie, stuff like that, like more than just watching it and being like, did that entertain me or not? Be like, what was the director, what was his deal, like, well, what was something that they were trying to say with this, what's the social context this comes out of. Those are all good things that like I think will help you understand it. But I think even more than that, what I would say is like art house movies are not as hard to get into as they seem like they are, or great art, stuff like that is not as with film is like one of the most accessible mediums, genuinely. And you already have some of the mental faculties to do that, even if you've never seen a movie before, to really analyze it. And it's just like, do not just be less scared of not understanding what's going on. Sometimes you're just not going to, and it'll take seeing it a few times to get it. That's okay. And just when you go in, instead of going, oh, that was weird, I don't like it, go, that was weird, why did they do that? That's a more productive thought process. Just ask yourself questions about how you're feeling at this moment. If it, if it's a shot that is showing you like a 2-minute shot of a tree, instead of going, why is it showing me a 2-minute shot of the tree? This is boring. Go, how does this make me feel? Why do you think the director is trying to make me feel that way? And once you kind of get past those barriers, like art house is really easy to get into, like artistic film. And that doesn't, and that doesn't mean you don't have to, or you can't also watch fun genre stuff. That's what I would say, is just like, don't put any limitations on what movies you think you're allowed or not allowed to watch. Just watch all of it and see what sticks.
I think being accepting that a lot of movies will not be fully explained is a huge thing, because there's a lot of movies that don't neatly wrap everything up, but it doesn't mean it wasn't a fun, you know.
Yeah. I mean, one of my I would put in like top 10 movies or whatever is Videodrome by David Cronenberg. And I've seen it a number of times right now, and if you ask me to like completely lay out what happens in the plot, there's about a point in the halfway mark where I interpret it differently every time I watch it, because it is, intentionally a chaotic and difficult to follow movie after a certain point. And it's kind of part of the point of the movie is for it to do that. So
nice. Cool. Well, Josiah, I really appreciate your time. You've had great perspective, and I know that everyone will appreciate hearing your thoughts on this. Any final thoughts you wanted to pass on?
I don't think I have anything specific. Just watch movies.
Perfect. You could be like Josiah and me. We started out watching, safe movies, and now we're into all sorts of weird foreign stuff, movies.
Yeah.
But anyways, thank you so much for your time, Josiah.
Yeah, for sure.
And we'll see you next time.